All right, good evening. The news gang is here, and tonight the BBI bill, the process that has been billed as an express train. And our question tonight, will Bill Ruto board the train? Now, we are also going to be looking at that conversation about the contention about consensus. Also on the show tonight, return of the ghosts of 2007 post-election violence. Does Kinoti have the X-Files, or is it a cold case? We'll take a look. On the memo, Jamila gets back to the dictionary meaning of emergency. Yvonne is taking on Kenya's ugly past and why we let the sleeping dog slide. Gashuri is punching big holes at anniversary towers ahead of the referendum. Kaikai kicks a big storm about the learned friends and the lost glory. And my angle tonight, keep my tribe out of it. Our sign language interpreter, or shall I say gangster, is Yula Zale.
And I want to make it clear here, that we're not talking about replacing a constitution. We're talking about amending a constitution.
Things have been said about this. It is dividing the people of Kenya. It is not addressing the issues of the common man, Mama Mboga, the Juakali, the watu wa wheelbarrows, and so on.
All right, let's begin, ladies and gentlemen. So we were here talking about BBI and not knowing what it was. Now here it is. There is a bill that was unveiled yesterday at the signing, the launch of the signing ceremony, and quite a lot of changes have been made, which we are going to get into. But let's talk a little bit about that. We were wondering where are people taking their recommendations, what's really going on, and Linus, the document that was unveiled yesterday had some inclusions, some deletions. Did that surprise you?
Not at all, because BBI has taken the form of a document that continuously listens without actually holding a listening session. If you look back and now this is another version, there have been several versions, and now this is what is settling down for the referendum. You can tell very, very clearly, even to the days of the task force, that they would listen to what sentiments are out there. And it's also a legitimate way of doing things. Throw the rabbit out there, see how people react, hear what they are saying, and then react accordingly. I think the BBI team listened to the voices that were coming out. There were concerns about things like the Kenya Police Council. That was removed, and the National Police Service retained as is. There was the very contentious issue of an ombudsman appointed by the president and cleared by Parliament. That also was changed. Now an ombudsman will be appointed by the Chief Justice. What a lot of Kenyans don't know is actually there exists currently a role of the judiciary ombudsman. It's a role that traditionally the Chief Justice does perform, and there's been that role. So, Joe, for me, the last few days, the past few weeks, the architects of BBI have been listening without saying it. And I want to add one more thing. The postponement that, first of all, looked indefinite. Remember, it was the launch of the signatures was supposed to have happened last week.
Yeah.
And suddenly there was a meeting between President Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto. And then word comes out, nobody ever confirmed whether it's true or false, that consensus was discussed and more time was required for consensus to be built. And so the next thing we saw was the postponement of the indefinite postponement of the launch of collection of signatures.
It became very definite in just a few weeks.
In a few weeks' time. And the only explanation one can give to that is, what was the postponement doing to the momentum of BBI? It was doing a lot of damage to it. Because you can see those opposed to BBI were already doing victory laps, saying you know, we have pushed it. It's been postponed. There'll be consensus. They are going to have a say. And I think what the BBI, pro-BBI forces did was to regroup quickly and say, this is not looking good. This is not good for momentum. This is not good for our optics. We have to have a definite launch. And that is why yesterday had to happen.
And Francis, in so doing, they seem to have put the hitherto opponents of BBI in an interesting place because, I mean, yeah, you were saying we need to change this. We have changed it. So where do we go from here? Because we haven't had very substantive responses from the various groups that were actually voicing their opposition to the first, you know, sort of indications that were there in the BBI report.
I look at it in three ways. Number one was immediately we saw the document unveiled both in Kisii and now formally at the Bomas of Kenya. Discussion about some of the recommendations and how difficult they were began therein. Actually, liken it to the venom in the nyoka, you know, so to say. People started identifying what were the venomous recommendations in that document. And by and large, you can say the tricky issues have been expunged from the document. The police council, the ombudsman, role of political parties in picking IEBC commissioners. Some of the contentious issues you can say have been dealt with. And probably it's a good thing because if Kenyans were told to read the document and understand it, then it answers the question that we were asking here. Once they have read it and understood it, what do they do with the recommendations that they will have? Now, interestingly, the BBI Coordinating Committee took note of the concerns that were raised. And it's a good thing because if you want to make the document all-inclusive, people-driven, then you must also listen to the recommendations that they are making and hear their concerns and why they are raising those specific concerns. Because I don't think it would be wise to amend the Constitution to make it worse than it is today. There's a reason why we, for example, moved from internal security minister being in charge of the national police. Yeah. There's a reason why the drafters of the 2010 Constitution came up with the idea of a National Police Service Commission and an independent policing oversight authority. So doing away with the two commissions and instead replacing it with a police council chaired by the Minister for Internal Security was a miss. By changing that, I think it's a good idea. Then secondly, the question of an ombudsman. If you're talking about independence of the judiciary, but at the same time you're recommending the president to appoint an ombudsman on his own without the input of parliament and other stakeholders, then it was not going to be a clever thing. By changing a bit of it here, the president will still appoint the judiciary ombudsman, but with the approval of the Senate. And this, the proposed ombudsman, if this proposal sails through, will have to submit an annual report to the National Assembly.
And then it will be an ex-officio member of the Judiciary
Service Commission.
And he'll also be vetted by the Senate before he is actually appointed by the president. So sort of trying to take away that tag that they had that, you know, this is going to be some kind of nyapara of the judiciary telling them what to do and all that.
I thought that was clever, Joe, because some of the changes that were coming up were very strong. And when you had sentiments like not a comma, not a full stop will be amended, you know, the initial talk that not a comma, not a full stop will be removed from the document, then it boldened the opponents of the process. But now that quite a number of things that were being raised by opponents of the process, you now also put them on the defensive. Because if you're saying you don't want a National Police Council, you don't want a judiciary ombudsman appointed by the president exclusively, you don't want political parties to participate in the recruitment of IEBC commissioners, and all those things have been removed, do you still support? Do you still oppose? I mean, do you now support? And today, you saw, for example, Musalia Mudavadi, he was raising very serious concerns initially. But today you saw in a press conference saying, Sasa kitu iko sawa.
And he had a very detailed press statement, actually. Yvonne, what stands out for you, especially in the changes that have been made? Because we're going to discuss them in a little bit of detail.
Yeah, I think it was the addition of responsibilities to the Senate. You know, there's been constant push and pull between the Senate and the National Assembly, and, you know, what are their roles and responsibilities beyond oversight of the counties. They now get to, like you were saying, vet and approve the Ombudsman, the Youth Council, and there are a number of others, right?
And the
controller of budget. That's right. And the controller of budget, as you know, is a very important office in terms of providing oversight over use of resources by both levels of government. So that, I think is interesting. But it was also, just you can see, I think, each of the meetings that were had by the different sectors, and you can see that in the changes. For example, when the leaders from Northeastern and the pastoralist communities met and raised their concerns, now you see new wording in the bill, right, where it now states that the state shall promote sustainable sources of livelihood, including agriculture. The new addition to that is pastoralism and the blue economy. Yes. Yeah. So you can see all of these things that just speak very directly.
But I know
to
they are
all
still
of those
very unhappy.
Yes.
The fact that of the 70 additional constituencies, they have only one.
Only one, right? Absolutely. But you tend to see where those additions are, and you can see that. And I find that interesting as well. Now, there were also calls for a constitutional conference at some point by those who opposed this and said, you know what, let's have this, out here in the open and for everybody to sort of sit down, maybe sort of round the fire, so to speak, to iron out those issues. Now that hasn't happened. And I did hear Gladys Boschele saying this morning, was it, on Daybreak with Wahiga Mara, that they've noted that the changes were being made after leaders had made their recommendations. But then she also went on to say that this proves that it's an ad hoc document subject to changes by the leaders and not necessarily from the people. So I suspect that we'll still continue to see some further issues being raised. But I thought that was interesting. Also, one more thing, Joe, about the IEBC now having the onus to make sure that the 2/3 gender rule is met at the nomination stage by political parties. I think that is definitely something new, and
that's going to be quite challenging. Jamila, yes. you can come in here because at the end of the day, mostly nomination is also a people process. It is an elective process in its own right, where people actually go and say, no, we want this one and not the other one. And then the person who has the most votes carries the day and then will carry the party's flag. But now we have a situation where I think it is Article 88 of this, where it's saying that the commission, this is IEBC, is responsible for conducting or supervising referenda and elections to any elective body office established by this constitution and any other elections as prescribed by an act of parliament, and in particular, and this is where Yvonne was talking about, the regulation of the process by which parties nominate candidates for elections, including ensuring that not more than 2/3 of the party's candidates are of the same gender. So they're kind of trying to cure this from the source, if you like. That may not be that easy, but here it is.
Yes, it is here, Joe. And remember, part of this is now what was changed, I think, in the document that was introduced yesterday, about the initial proposal to nominate 70 lawmakers to National Assembly through mixed member proportional representation. That has been expunged. Instead, the bill proposes creation of 70 new constituencies, bringing to 360 the total number of constituencies. Now, to appease persons with disability and the youth, the bill proposes 6 nomination slots for the 2 special interest groups. However, and this is something I think Ashuri would have to explain to us very well, we're talking about it just before the show, and it brings in this issue talking about 2/3 and having the same of the same gender, whether male or female. It says that the National Assembly could, however, end up with more members if at least 1/3 of either gender is not elected. The bill proposes nomination slots for the best losers identified through top-up lists submitted by political parties after the general election to settle the difference. Which means we actually have more than the stipulated number of 360 members of parliament, in case we do not have, out of the number of members of parliament who will be in the parliament, having 2/3 of the same gender and 1/3 of a different one. Gashri will explain that to us. But something I really wanted us to, Yvonne mentioned it, and I want to add on to it, is what Gladys Boschele was talking about this morning, that some of the changes that were made had to be made because leaders had spoken out about them. And some of those changes that were made are issues that the Deputy President had brought up. Remember, even at the Bomas meeting, when the document was launched for the second time, he had issues with the creation of the Judicial Ombudsman, being a presidential appointee, sitting in the JSC, talking about how it jeopardizes the independence of the judiciary. That is one. And two, one of the other issues he had was the proposal to replace the National Police Service Commission with a Kenya Police Council chaired by the Interior CS. You've mentioned that. And he talked about the independence of the police. And now that has been, it has been dropped. But now we have more powers for the Inspector General of Police, granting him or her operational autonomy. And also the DCI has been elevated to a Deputy Inspector General of Police, and he'll sit in that commission, which means he'll have a direct hand in vetting some of the officers who end up in this department. And finally, one of the other issues that the Deputy President had an issue with was the proposal of having 4 commissioners of the IEBC picked to represent political parties, saying that it stood to threaten the credibility of the commission. And instead now...
The DP actually likened it to the teams selecting...
Exactly, or a select referee, wow. But now it has been replaced by political parties nominating... the IBC commissioners will be nominated by a multi-sectoral panel and appointed by the president. Which
is in the IBC Act, which was recently...
So I think that's one of the reasons why... I think part of why some of the considerations were taken into some of the opinions were taken into consideration, so that you don't have or face outright rejection of this document. We keep talking about non-contested referendum versus a contested referendum. And for me, after what we spoke about last week and some of the issues we pointed out, we were noting just before the show, are actually some of the issues that have been rejected or expanded.
And we'll look at some of those, because now we need to take a break. Remember, there was also the contention about the structure of that expanded executive, including the appointment of the Prime Minister. For example, there was confusion that if you're talking about the largest party or coalition of parties in Parliament, that you would actually end up with the person who is supposed to be the Prime Minister also being the person who is supposed to be the leader of opposition. But there's a way they've cured that, and we'll look at that after the break. So News Gang is taking a short break. We'll be right back for more discussions.